Oh, hi there. I didn't see you come in. It's good to have you here in the shop tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to beautiful Ormond Beach, Florida. This is another edition of Grassroots Motorsports Live presented by CRC Industries. I'm JG Pasterjack. You guys are out there on the web tonight on a very, very fun night. We got our old friend Steve Stafford here in the shop to talk about aerodynamics, a very, very complex but shockingly intuitive subject, and one that I am becoming more and more familiar with as we get deeper into our project cars, especially this C5 Corvette that is now beginning to sport lots of cool carbon fiber aerodynamic extensions from RHR Performance, a cool Lexan spoiler on the back from Shields Windshields, as well as a wing from RHR. We're going to be talking about how all that stuff works tonight, and about stuff that you can do in your shop and at the autocross course, at the track, to help the wind, help air pressure, help these fluid forces, these complex fluid forces, at the very least work for you and not work against you. And I think you'll be as surprised as I've been over the last couple of years learning about this stuff. Look, I was a humanities major. I don't know this complex math and stuff, but you start examining it, you start looking at this stuff and talking to people that know what they're talking about, and you realize it all kind of makes sense, and it's not nearly as terrifying and as scary as people want you to believe. All right, we got a great crowd forming here already tonight, so I want to remind everybody to do that thing we do at the top of the show, where you go down to your comment field. If you're watching us on Facebook, especially on Facebook, go down to your comment field and just smash a couple buttons, make a comment. I don't care if you have to say anything intelligent. I don't care if you just kind of elbow a couple of keys. If you make a comment and that flood of comments hits our walls, real good for the sort of mojo of the show. It kind of fools Facebook's algorithm into bumping us up the charts a little bit. So we really appreciate that, and it just lets us know you're here. And Greg says a lot of our usual suspects are here. A lot of our usual suspects are here. And yes, Andrew reminds everybody to share. We really appreciate those shares. If you're watching us on YouTube tonight, thank you very much for that. We appreciate that. We are also monitoring comments from YouTube. So if anybody has questions throughout the evening, we will try and get to them as quick as we can. I will be watching Facebook chat over here. We'll be watching YouTube chat over there. We'll try and get to everybody's questions as just as quick and efficiently as we can as we're explaining this stuff. Before we bring on our special guest, we tell you guys about the folks that support this show. You can see them back on the wall over there, our friends from CRC Industries. You can check them out at crcindustries.com. Even better, check them out at any retailer near you, any hardware store, any auto parts store like Napa or Advance Auto or O'Reilly or Walmart or Lowe's, for God's sakes, or Harbor Freight. If you're buying that stuff from CRC, you know you're getting a good product. Everybody uses brake clean. Everybody uses carb cleaner and fuel injection cleaner. But if you're buying the CRC stuff, you know that you're also getting a product from a company that supports the stuff you love, these amateur and professional motorsports at every single level. So please do us a solid and check them out and support them. Also, check out our friends at Koni, koni-na.com. They're in the midst of the Koni Activate the Nation tour right now. You can see that in a city near you. They got a Mustang GT, they got a BMW 3 Series, Koni equipped and not Koni equipped. You can drive them back to back on an autocross course. Check out their schedule. We'll post up their schedule in the comments down here, and you can check them out somewhere. They're in the eastern half of the U.S. right now. We're going to be joining them in DeLand, Florida Monday. We'll have a live broadcast from the Koni Activate the Nation tour at Brothers Performance in DeLand. So you can see that certainly on our broadcast, but hopefully you'll have a chance to see it live as well. And also check out our friends at autobooks-aerobooks.com. Autobooks Aerobooks is the world's greatest bookstore right there in Burbank, California. Tens of thousands of books, magazines, DVDs, and collectibles. And if you can't make it out there to Burbank, California, check them out on the web at autobooks-aerobooks.com. If you can make it out to Burbank, though, you are in for a treat because they have live events there every single week. They have cruise-ins, they have cars and coffee events on the weekends. They have author signings going on almost every week. Very cool place to hang out. All right, let's get to the fun stuff. I see a lot of our friends here. Nate wants to know when I take my shirt off. Nate, I take my shirt off as soon as you show up in Ormond Beach, Florida, baby, and you can be part of our live studio audience to watch the de-shirting show. All right, Steve Stafford has been a long-time friend of ours. Come on over and say hi. It is good to see you, my friend. Steve was, I've known, well, technically I've known Steve longer than my wife, because when I met him, he was actually dating my wife. And so that's how far we go back in the extended GRM family. So probably 25 years ago, we started the Daytona Autosport Club that you were one of the founding members of. So kind of grew up around here, autocross with this guy, and just adopting into the extended GRM sort of technical family. Went on to get a degree in aerodynamics from Embry-Riddle University here in Daytona, and then started working immediately for Swift Engineering.
Worked at Swift Engineering in California on their IndyCar program running their wind tunnel.
Yeah, and in the past, has worked for Celine.
Worked for Celine, TRD on multitudes of projects, and lots of amateur stuff on the side as well.
Yeah, and you've been Toyota now for 15 years?
16 years.
16 years has been doing Aero for, your NASCAR is your specialty, right now,
NASCAR is what I'm doing now.
But has also been involved in the IndyCar program at Toyota, the
sports
Pikes
cars.
Peak cars.
Yeah, a little bit of anything and everything.
Yeah, so... we'll get into the technical stuff here first, but what was it that drew you to these sciences? Was this something you're always fascinated with?
To be absolutely honest, as a kid, I was sitting on my back porch and watching the crop duster putting the spray down to kill the bugs and stuff in the field behind my house, and I thought, airplanes are cool. So I decided later on in life that aerospace would be really cool, so I started trying to do that. And in the process, realized that race cars are more fun because the timeline for projects is a lot faster. Things happen a lot faster in motorsports than they do in aerospace. And that's how I got tied into race cars.
So, and you were, I think you were one of the lucky ones to come out of Riddle. We've worked a little bit with their SAE team and their EcoCar team there. And the thing that I always hear from kids that go to, especially a school like Riddle that has access to the greatest resources, even more so now than when you were there, but when you were there, they were fantastic. But you're there now with a full-size autoclave. You can get a chassis in and wind tunnels, and then you go out in the real world and get a job at a race shop, and it's like, hey, welcome aboard. Here's your wrench.
Yeah.
And but Swift was probably a nice transition into the real world.
Swift
with a place.
Was a real. It was really a lucky strike on my part. I sent them a resume and said, I saw your ad in an SCCA publication, or an article about the wind tunnel in your SCCA publication, and I'd like to work there. And they had just happened to post an ad for a wind tunnel operator that week, and they flew me out, and I got the job, and that was, lucked into it, honestly. Yeah,
and if you're shopping for a technically minded school, the hire rate from Embry-Riddle University is in the high 90% range.
Yes, it's very high. Yes.
Yeah, they don't make a lot of stupid people coming out of there. So, all right, let's get into Aero from a very basic direction here. And I think something that's really struck me in the last few years is how afraid the amateur motorsport community is of Aero. Nobody wants to adopt Aero into rules packages because they think, the cost will escalate exponentially and complexity will escalate exponentially, but they have no problem putting a set of three-way adjustable $10,000 shocks on a car, but let's not put an off-the-shelf wing on a car. So, dispel some myths for me. Is this stuff as scary as people think it is?
It's really not. It really is very intuitive. You used the word intuitive earlier. That's a really good way to approach it. You look at how nature's crafted all of its animals that fly and swim and things of that sort, and their aerodynamics or hydrodynamics are the same things that we're working with. So at the end of the day, you are trying to emulate what nature spent millions of years doing. And we try and put numbers to it to make it a little easier to have some grasp on why we're doing what we're doing.
And one of the things that really kind of drove it home for me is a couple years ago, I think we were having this conversation, and I was trying to get it through my head, the difference between downforce and drag. And you finally just kind of phrased it in a way that I realized downforce and drag are the exact same things, just downforce has a directional component to it.
Yes.
So when I started thinking about it that way, I started realizing, like, oh, we're not really trying to reinvent anything that hasn't happened here already. There's almost no wrong way to do this. There's just certain degrees of right ways to
Right,
to
and
do this.
it comes down to efficiency. I mean, you're using the differential pressures to make downforce, and you're going to get some drag in the process. The trick is to get more downforce than drag.
Okay, so let's start out with actually then a very simple device. We'll get to the cool carbon fiber stuff in a little bit. Let's start out with the cool Lexan stuff. Let's just start out with a simple flat plane spoiler, because that's something that's relevant to a lot of people in a lot of different racing classes. A lot of classes can add just a simple flat plane spoiler. What are we trying to accomplish with this, other than have a more place to put stickers?
Stickers are a very important part in professional motorsports for sure, but primarily you're trying to take the airspeed, the velocity of the air that's coming across the top of the car, and convert that into a pressure differential that gives you downforce. In this case, we're making a lot of leverage on the rear end by bringing the air that is coming in effectively to a standstill. So you're bringing 60-mile-an-hour air to a complete stop, and then that air has to then accelerate up and around the spoiler because the pressure behind it is lower. So what you've got effectively is a dam, not unlike one that holds water back, except in this case you're trying to hold back air, and the air is going to escape around every crevice it can find, ends, top, underneath, wherever it can go. But it's always going to generate a lower pressure in the back, and that lower pressure, because of the leverage above the wheel center line and behind the wheel center line, effectively makes downforce by leveraging the car down at the back.
Or at the very least, it removes lift that was there before.
Yes,
So
yes.
you basically, by doing this, we can actually look at it fairly intuitively. We've created this well that air is. I mean, air is a.
It has mass.
It has mass. It's a plastic compound. So you're going to stack up a lot of air in this area. The more air you stack up, the higher the pressure is going to be relative to what it was before. The higher the pressure is here, the lower the relative pressure is behind it.
Exactly.
So you've created a mass of air pushing down on the car. This is one of the things we've been using to tune some of this stuff with. A very simple. I got this one on Amazon for $75. It's a Magna-Helic gauge, which is a very precise pressure differential gauge.
That was one of our fallback development tools at Swift. Whenever there was an issue with a sensor, we would always check it against a mechanical gauge.
So when we did some of our testing on the Mustang, we got some numbers off of that. We were able to translate those into fairly realistic downforce numbers. Give me some sort of general rules of thumb. Like, what kind of downforce are we creating with a 10-inch spoiler like this, or an 8-inch spoiler?
A 10-inch spoiler that's most of 6 feet long, and it's going to have 3-ish feet of space in front of it, is going to generate probably 250 pounds of downforce at, let's make it around 100 miles an hour. It's going to create about half of that much in drag, so you're going to wind up with about 100 pounds of drag, but at less than 100 miles an hour, generally you're not power limited on something like this car, so you're less worried about the drag than you are about generating the downforce to help you get the power to the ground so you can accelerate down the track.
And relate that drag to horsepower for me. What's 100 pounds of drag equate to in horsepower?
At 100 miles an hour, 100 pounds of drag is 10 horsepower-ish, maybe a little more. I'd have to run the numbers, but it's kind of in that range.
Okay.
10 to 15 horsepower, not a whole lot.
So one of the things we hear all the time is you're quoting 100 miles an hour for that. A lot of folks run at lower speeds than that. Autocross situations, this was a spoiler designed for autocross. Everybody, or not everybody, but the conventional wisdom, which we know is always right, was always, you can't really make appreciable downforce at autocross speeds. What's this doing for us at an autocross speed?
At autocross speeds, you're going to be roughly a quarter of what you're seeing at 100 miles an hour. So it is less, but it is still a significant amount of weight. You wouldn't leave an extra 100 pounds or 70 pounds of weight in the trunk of the car for it to float around. But if you can generate that 70 pounds of weight at speed without having the mass at the back of the car, then that's absolutely a benefit.
And in a sport timed to the thousandth of a second,
Yes.
you know, that 70 pounds of downforce with two equal cars is
If that gives you 0.02 of a second acceleration, benefit on acceleration without having it, then that's a benefit.
So
and stack it up for every corner, and maybe you're into hundredths or tenths if you're really good.
All right, so tell us a little bit about fabricating and properly sort of sizing and angling something like this for your car. You when we were consulting with you on designing this one, you know, we had certain limitations that we had to stay within the silhouette of the car. But you also quoted us like a 65 to 70 degree angle of attack. What's significant about that?
So generically, you would like it to stand up perpendicular to the air. So in this case, the air is coming down the rear deck at some angle. And across the ends, it's coming in fairly flat, but you're trying to adjust effectively to get the maximum force on that sheet of Lexan in this case, as perpendicular to the sheet as possible for the airflow. So you kind of target the center because the center is where you're going to generate the most pressure. The outboard ends, because of the spill across the ends and the flow around and under and above, you have less pressure there. So you really kind of want to target the angle at the front. And it's a profile of the car would show that the spoiler is more or less perpendicular to a straight line from the back of the roof to the back of the deck.
Okay. So, and is that a fairly good rule of thumb? Just to sort of
it's a
drop
pretty
a string
good,
from the top of your roof
drop
to
a
the
string, measure an angle, and set your spoiler 90 degrees to that is a great starting point. Generically, most cars, proportion-wise, wind up in that 65 to 70 degree range, unless they're a hatchback, in which case the hatch is more or less your angle.
Somebody wants to know why the door in the background is upside down. Oh my God, I've never noticed that before. That door is upside down because my father-in-law, who built this place, was, you know Butch as well as I do. He was a builder, he didn't ask a lot of questions before he built something.
Yeah, not so much a perfectionist.
Yeah.
If it went together,
yeah, he was amazing at assembling things, but he wasn't a planner. He was a doer. He was a man of action, and that is amazing. That is a good call. The toilet is on the floor in there though, so the like reality doesn't flip over 180 degrees.
Not always.
Once you go in there. So yeah, Greg wants to know: Are we going to get into diffusers? Yes, we're going to actually. The complexity level will be rising throughout the show, Greg. All right, so let's talk a little bit about maybe having an adjustable spoiler.
Okay.
I was going to originally make this one adjustable. We started talking a little bit. You said as long as we get it in the ballpark there, we're probably pretty good. Are you splitting hairs at that point? I mean, what's the difference between a 71 degree and a 66 degree?
You're really going to be trading off downforce and drag. So at that point, you're really giving up a fraction of a pound of one for the other. So it really is fine tuning at that point. So again, if you're campaigning the same car every weekend, planning to go to nationals, make those adjustments, get absolutely every bit that you can out of it. But at the same time, having a spoiler on the car versus not having one is a much bigger step. So put one on the car, and you're going to have that much more benefit. Then you can start to fine tune it if you feel that you need to.
And without access to a wind tunnel, what's the average person going to do that fine tuning?
Honestly, you can do skid pad, you can do acceleration runs from 30 to 60, what have you, things of that sort if you've got access to a reasonably safe place to do that. But the primary goal is making sure that you're able to get power down or reduce lift to help get the power down. So
Gotcha.
it's really about transferring the load to the tires.
All right, we got two good questions actually about running with windows up and down and about tough testing. I'm going to get to those in just a second. Actually, we'll use this opportunity to walk back around to the front and tell you guys about our friends from, let me see what I'm going to grab here, from CRC Industries, folks. we got a wall of CRC stuff back there. Yes, it looks great on the show, but B, just as important, it is stuff that we use every week on our project cars. I use a lot of this QD electronic cleaner. It's very mild. It is paint safe. It's plastic safe. It's actually great for getting sticker residue off because you can spray it on pretty much anything and it's not going to melt the substrate of whatever you're taking sticker residue off of, and it completely flashes off in almost no time at all. It's a really, really fantastic mild cleaner. One of the really favorite things that I've discovered as we've been involved with CRC that I didn't know they make. They make over 15,000 different products, and you can get their most popular ones like Brake Clean and Carb Cleaner at a retailer near you, Harbor Freight or Lowe's or Home Depot or Walmart or O'Reilly Auto Parts or Napa. And you can also get, Chris, zoom in on the Brake Clean Pro Series back there, because that stuff is on the shelf now. Hey, what's the only thing better than Brake Clean? Folks, it's more Brake Clean, and Brake Clean Pro Series is now available to the consumer. It is Brake Clean in a larger container, and I actually saw some at Harbor Freight the other day. It is out there among you, and it is really, really handy because you're not constantly switching out cans of Brake Clean. So check them out at crcindustries.com or a retailer near you. Let's get to these questions here because they were fairly interesting. So Eric wants to know about windows up and down. How big of a difference, especially on modern cars? It seems windows make a bigger difference on more modern cars. How big of a difference are we making with windows up and down when it comes to drag or possibly, turbulence and just sort of upsetting the balance of a car?
The windows, modern cars, I have a pet peeve with modern cars in that they've taken all the rain gutters and things off that used to help us stay dry when we had the window down a little bit when you were driving while it was raining. But now they've taken all those away and moved them further up on the roof, things like that. So if one window is down a little bit, you get weird harmonics in the car. And that harmonic is air trying to get in and trying to get back out of the cabin. So anytime you've got a window down, all the air that goes in has to come back out somewhere. So it winds up generally going in at the back of the window, and it comes out at the A-post because there's a pretty strong low pressure right at the front of the window. So you wind up with a lot of flow back out at the A-post and inflow at the B-post. So you wind up with a lot of transfer of air, and generally anytime you're making the air change direction, you're adding drag. And ultimately that's what the manufacturers see as well, is that's why they've flushed all the window edges in so that they're effectively low drag for their CAFE numbers. So
what's your default position going to be? So our example was this guy's got a 5-door Fiesta, and is he better off running with everything up, everything down, some up, some down? If you had to pick one of those, what do you think is going to be the most consistent, the most?
Run the air conditioning, put the windows up, because the engine's making more than enough power to run the air conditioning. You're going to have more efficiency that way. And at the end of the day, it's going to be lower drag. So if it's actually a track event, then you're going to have a little bit lower drag, a little bit better top speed at the end of the straightaway. If it's driving on the street, you're going to be more comfortable and be able to control the temperature exactly where you want.
So, I mean, unless your rules say otherwise, because a lot of rules
there
packages
are some
are going to
rules
say
for windows down, and at that point, you're probably wearing a fire suit anyway, so you're just not going to be terribly comfortable on a hot day.
That's just how it's going to work. All right, and then somebody asked about tuft testing, and we also know about stuff like oil trace testing. What are some, besides the Magnehelic gauge, what are some sort of concrete things we can do to measure what some of this stuff is doing?
Tuft testing is great for determining direction of flow and how much energy the flow has on the surface. The same with oil testing. A drop of oil or a tuft, if it's stretched out really long and thin, it has high energy. If it's compressed and not really moving very much, the air's not dragging it along very much. So you've got effectively low energy in that area. Low energy in front of a windshield is downforce on the front. Low energy in the back of the rear glass is generally drag because you'll have separation and low energy back there. But on the front face of the spoiler, low energy is good. You want the air to be effectively dead, just stacked right up on the spoiler. So it depends on where it's at as far as what you're looking for. If the tufts are rotating into a cone shape, You've got a pretty strong vortex locally.
And vortex is a lot of drag, right?
Vortices are very draggy, but they are very low pressure.
Okay.
So you can generate a lot of low pressure locally with a vortex.
And you can use
can use
vortices
those to your
to
advantage.
affect. So
Yes.
that's actually a great segue into some of the stuff going on up at the front of this car. You came over early. We were working on some of this stuff. This is a lot of goodies from our friends at RHR Performance, who manufacture a lot of fantastic carbon fiber aero pieces for a bunch of different cars. And this is their package for the Corvette, which includes this fantastic, massive, exquisitely engineered splitter and a couple of dive planes on here. And as we were placing the dive planes, you were sort of explaining how they work, what the relationship is between the splitter and the dive planes, and just what we're trying to get the air to do at the side of the car here. So, yeah.
So more or less, dive planes are short vortex generators. They are effectively a very short stubby wing. And what you're trying to do is get high pressure air on the top surface. That air spills over the side and creates a very strong vortex on the outside edge. And that low pressure pulls down as much as the high pressure on top. In this particular case, that low pressure also translates to trying to pull air out of the wheel opening. And when you stack them like this, you get a magnified effect that's greater than each one individually, but only by a little bit, because the low pressure on this one affects the high pressure on top of this. The low pressure on this affects the high pressure on top of the splitter. So there's a biplane effect that you run into. So you can't, they're not 100% additive, but they all stack up to generate more low pressure in this region at the front of the wheel to help draw some of that air out.
We had a good question from YouTube that just came in that actually raised a good point, is that a lot of what we're trying to do on some cars is you don't want to get into this mindset of just creating downforce. You want to get into to a mindset of reducing lift at some point, or even more to the point, creating differential pressures. You want to have more pressure on top of the car than on the bottom of the car.
Yes.
And we've got a lot of areas of the car, as we move back here, like wheel wells are a disaster area.
Yes.
when it comes to air.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of rotating air flowing in, flowing out. You've got extra heat added from the brakes and things of that sort that add energy to the air. It is a mess. The flow around a tire is really a mess. You get weird entrainment where the air tries to follow the tire around to the front, and you wind up with lots of messy flow. But the net effect is outflow of the wheel opening that makes the car appear wider.
So what does that translate into from behind the wheel? What's all that? So you have this outflow. You've got weird pressures happening inside of there. What does that translate into for the driver? Or what could it translate into?
Generally, it translates to lots of, well, not lots. A wheel rotating by itself makes lift. A wheel rotating inside a contained area like the wheel opening and the fender is going to generate a little bit of lift, not as much as a wheel by itself. And part of that is the air coming under the splitter or under the front fascia hits a high pressure in front, so that's pushing up on the wheel. And then you've got the high pressure coming across the front that pushes back. So at the end of the day, it's drag and lift and round things rotating in the air near the ground are really just draggy in general.
You said a wheel rotating creates lift.
It does.
Why? But if I'm a pitcher throwing a curveball, I've got forward rotation on that, so it's going to create lower pressure on the bottom. Why wouldn't a wheel rotating the same way?
Lower pressure on the top.
No, fastball creates lower pressure on the top with backspin. So a wheel spinning forward, wouldn't that create higher pressure on top? What?
The problem with a baseball versus a wheel is you've got the ground in effect.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Right.
So it's compressing that air
right.
into the ground.
You've got a very high pressure zone below the wheel center line on the front.
Okay. So if we could somehow figure out a way to get the wheel off the ground, all of our problems would be solved. Those wheels would
there have been some developments in the past where rotating cylinders were used as wings on airplanes.
Oh, wow.
And they use a similar scenario on some helicopters where they use a round tail structure, but there's no propeller at the back. They blow air across one side, and that makes your lateral control.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we'll talk about some ways to solve that problem in a second. But first, let's talk about, hey, your wheels coming off the ground? What's a great way to keep your wheels on the ground? Koni shocks. Hello. And you can sample the all-new Koni. It's like an evolution of the FSD, which is one of my favorite shocks. These Koni Advanced shocks, these Koni Active shocks that they are previewing and premiering on their Koni Activate the Nation tour, hitting 26 cities around the country. Maybe you've already had a chance to go to one. They've had 5 or 6 of these already as long ago as last Monday. They were at Turn 14 Engineering today. Next Monday, they'll be in DeLand, Florida. We will be there live with them, sampling some of the new products from Koni. If you have a chance to get to any of these events, it's a fantastic way to try out some new shocks on a couple different cars and see what Koni has in store for you. Check out their whole lineup at koni-na.com, and we'll throw a couple of links in the chat. You can check out one of their Koni Activate in the Nation events, hopefully coming to a city near you. Might even get to meet Lee Grimes in person. I know he has been at some of those. All right, let's get back to, hey, Katie's got a lot of notes. All right. YouTube. YouTube's got a great question about splitter design info. We will get to that. How to, what?
An estimate,
yeah. Yep, design for some splitter, okay. And rules for vertical spacing of dive planes. Great questions, and we can actually segue naturally. So let's talk first. We were just kind of getting into some ways to solve these pressure problems in wheel wells. So let's start there. We'll get to our, and thank you for the questions tonight, YouTube. YouTube on the ball tonight. And you know what? Another great chance for everybody to like and share. And if you're on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. So let's talk about ways to solve our pressure problems inside the wheel wells.
All right, so the general pressure distribution inside the wheel well is a high pressure in the top and front of the wheel well. So a good way to get rid of that pressure is to relieve it through vents in the top of the hood or fender, or a little bit of both. And generally those, you see them on sports cars on a regular basis, especially the IMSA cars, Le Mans cars type
Now
things.
mandatory on those cars, I believe.
Mandatory on some, and some weird rules, ancient rules that kind of get dragged into it as well. But generally speaking, you want to vent as much of that high pressure air as you can, because even if you wind up with the same high pressure above the car as you do in the wheel well, the net pressure is 0, so that the downforce that's generated elsewhere can pull the car down.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go back up front here. We had a good question, and you were explaining this to me a little bit before about proper vertical spacing of the components we now have on the front. So we've got a splitter down there interacting with a double set of dive planes. How do we know we're spacing those properly vertically? And how is our venue going to change? Like if I'm building an autocross car, is that going to change versus whether I'm building a track car?
The general rule of thumb for spacing the dive planes is you want to get the dive planes working on the bottom 2/3 of the wheel opening. Okay. The top segment, as you get into that last third, you really start to drag further and further back on the wheel opening, and it's diminishing returns for sure as you get further back. So you kind of want the dive planes operating in the bottom 2/3. And in our case, we've got two dive planes and the splitter face to deal with. So we more or less split the difference between each of them on the leading edge, so that the trailing edge has as much room to work as possible, generating the low pressure that hopefully doesn't overhang too terribly much, so that this one has a little bit more benefit because it's overhanging to the back than this one.
So some of that's going to be also limited by the physical design of the car too, whether you've got lights there or whether you've got
regulations that limit on your profile of the car and things of that sort.
Gotcha.
So if you've got bumpers, and you can put dive planes under the bumper and it's still within the profile, or above the bumper and it's within the profile, you can make those work as well.
All right, so let's talk about the actual design of splitters and stuff now. And how are we? This is a great question. how do we know they're working? How do we estimate downforce from a splitter? How do we use those estimates to size them properly? Some classes limit us to the size of a splitter. How do we know we're getting the most benefit from a certain splitter design within those limitations? So what are we actually looking at? How are we best making these work down here?
Well, I mean, as far as estimating your performance, that's really difficult because it's a very dynamic system. As soon as you adjust something on the front of the car, everything underneath changes. And those changes, they all cascade back and forth across the car. So the spoiler on the back of the car will change how this splitter performs. So it is cascading back and forth. But if you think about the exposed area, in this case we've got, let's call it a 200 square inches of area on top of the splitter that's exposed, and the rest is hidden underneath the car. That 200 square inches, if you've got a tenth of a PSI on each of those, that gives you 20 pounds of downforce, assuming you can get the air to come to an average of about a tenth of a PSI above atmospheric. Below, you're going to wind up with lower pressure because the air is trying to stream itself underneath the splitter. And again, you've got a massive area to work with, so you can take the effective area and come up with an approximation using a Magna Helic gauge to get pressures and work out some rough numbers on what sort of pressures and loads you should have coming out of that.
So if your rule's limited, you want to certainly working to the limits of those rules. Like for example, if you're building a cam car for SCCA, yes, you're not allowed to come out past the front bumper, right, but you obviously want to come as close to that front bumper as you can, because every square inch of surface area you add to the top edge of that splitter, yes, is more room for that air to sit on, yes, and you aren't allowed to go past the center line of the front wheels, but every square inch of the bottom is more room for that low pressure to pull down on. Yes. So you definitely don't want to cut any corners that you don't have to, basically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you basically maximize area and keep the flow to the splitter area as clean as possible, both the top and the bottom.
And then in a splitter like this, where we've got side fences out here and sort of a sculpted front edge, what are those little details doing for us that just a flat plane splitter is not necessarily doing for us?
As the air approaches the car, generally the air that goes up over the hood, that just touches the hood, is actually going to come from 6 inches or so off the ground. It's actually going to roll up and over pretty dramatically right in front of the car. So the splitter is seeing air that's only coming from the bottom couple inches above the ground, really just slightly pretty close to even with the bottom edge of the splitter. And that air is going to try and turn and go under while the air above is going over. So you really want to make a nice clean radius so that air doesn't have to navigate a really sharp corner, which is going to cause drag, which is going to separate and have weird rotations and flows.
So even if you're making a splitter out of 1/2-inch plywood, take a router
and put a radius on it.
Awesome. And then what about in the back? This is a great question here that you followed up on. We talk about front diffusers. This one, and as we get further into installing this RHR stuff, we'll show you the details. Actually, you can go to their website and see the details. But this design actually has diffuser areas that ramp up just past the front of the car into the wheel wells.
Into the wheel openings. Yeah.
So you're further you're accelerating that air, so you're reducing the pressure. Is there a place you want to do that that's better than, do you want to start kicking that up as soon as you can? Do you want to wait to a certain point on the depth of it?
For a front diffuser, you want to start that reasonably early.
Okay.
Again, you've got that high pressure air in front of the tire. So if you diffuse it too much, the high pressure air from the tire can cause the diffuser to stall.
Okay.
So
you just get an area of turbulence right there in the front of the tire.
You just get a big wad of very low energy air right in front of the tire.
Gotcha. And you generally do want to run those diffuser tunnels into the wheel wells?
Into the wheel well, because it's these particular ones are diverging. They kind of point from the middle of the car outward, and that's what the air is trying to do already. So they're kind of helping to get the air evacuated to the side of the car, right, rather than under it.
Ben asked about radiusing the leading edge of the splitter. Yeah, you radius that bottom edge of the splitter. You want to create an upside down wing, basically.
Ultimately, yes.
So yeah, you basically, so your splitter in a simple flat plane splitter, if you're just going and using 1/2-inch plywood or what a 23, 30-second plywood or whatever
Yeah.
it is, flat on top, radius that bottom edge, and you're actually
get
going
the biggest radius that
Yeah.
looks like a nice clean fit, and make a nice smooth finish along that radius right to the bottom.
Okay, so we also have just a cheap, well, it's $500 eBay air dam on this to provide just a fill panel between our splitter and the car, because the front of the car is separated. Is there any benefit to, if you can't run a full splitter, like with a Corvette? If you're building a cam car, for example, you can't come out past the bumper.
Right. And the bumper is the body.
The bumper is the body. So just lowering the front end with a spoiler, is there some advantage there, or is that just?
There's absolutely an advantage.
Okay.
At the end of the day, you're reducing the amount of air that goes under the front of the car. You're creating a very sharp edge, so you get a really low pressure right behind that spoiler, and that generates quite a bit of front downforce.
Okay.
It's very sensitive to gap to the ground. So if you get it down, if you drop your ride height a little bit, you're going to gain a lot of downforce very quickly.
Okay. And actually, that's something, we're jumping around a little bit, but that's something that we didn't bring up earlier, is one of the biggest things you can do to affect aero balance of a car is rake and ride height. And that you can do on any car that you can change ride height on. How big of an adjustment can we, I know that was one thing you were big with the IT cars, was
Yes.
playing with rake adjustments. How big of a change can we make in some cars? I mean, obviously, it's going to depend on
Yeah.
the car itself.
At the end of the day, it depends on what's going to hit the ground first.
Okay.
So if you can adjust the car so that every now and then it just touches the racing surface, then you're pretty much as low as you want to go. You want to have some gap underneath everything. Otherwise, the bottom of the car can't breathe. And the whole thing has to have air and energy of all that high-speed air for it to work. If you drag this splitter on the ground, you effectively only have the high pressure on the top, and you have no suction on the bottom side. So you've got to keep some air gap underneath the splitter.
Gotcha. All right, somebody, our friend Doug asked us about wheel spats. If we're running like a dive plane set up like this, does it also help? On a short nosed car like this, obviously there's not much room for it, but something like this big like his Camaro is a wheel spat running up there. What are we trying to accomplish with something like that?
That's you're talking about more or less a filler panel from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
It's more of an air deflector. It does the same thing as the dive planes, except it's a little bit more blunt. It's more like a spoiler turned on its side.
Okay.
And it's going to generate low pressure right on the back edge, which is going to help pull air.
Evacuate that.
It does the same thing. It's a little. It depends on the car. Some are easier to fabricate or provide than others, but.
Gotcha. Okay, I think we're caught up. Some good questions from YouTube. Somebody wrote to Mr. Applejack. It says, everybody knows why you put Aero on a car. It helps you pick up chicks. Absolutely right, sir or madam. We were actually, I was telling everybody knows we have ducks that hang around here. We were actually talking about our ducks earlier and the way that they sort of, Muscovy ducks are not known for being graceful soarers, but because they're so dense and heavy, they use ground effect to their advantage, really sort of intuitively and to make them more efficient flyers.
Pelicans and seagulls.
Yeah, pelicans are amazing users of ground effect. You can watch, if you ever go to the beach somewhere where there's pelicans, you can watch them just sort of using that.
They flap their wings once every 10, 15 seconds, and they just ride that high pressure in front of the wave, which is a spoiler.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, like, what of that translates to this? I didn't. One of the things I never considered, which is a simple thing, is you always have the ground to deal with a race car. Yeah. So you take these sort of assumptions about how wings work, and you've got to make them interact with the ground. How much of a factor is the ground in making this stuff work?
Ground effect is a huge impact on airplanes that are near the ground. You can take a wing that doesn't generate very much lift at all, or downforce, in free stream away from the ground, and put it near the ground, and you can nearly double its effective lift. Or downforce, either one, honestly. At the end of the day, the air coming off of a wing that's lifting is turned down into the ground and effectively buoys the plane up a little higher because you've got so much energy being impacted into the ground.
And that's kind of making it inherently harder to tune some of this because you're trying to create downforce, or you're trying
Right.
to erase that interface with the ground as much as possible.
Or take advantage of it.
Okay, so how would we take advantage
So
of it
taking
then?
advantage of it is when you've got that low pressure underneath the front end of the splitter, if it's close to the ground, the biplane effect works where the pressure on one surface affects the other surface. So you're effectively low pressure between the two, which is pulling the car down because the ground can't move.
Okay.
So you're using the ground effect to your advantage.
Actually, Wally wants to see some ducks in a wind tunnel. We're actually gonna be doing some wind tunnel testing as soon as we can schedule something with this car and all the accessories. I don't know if I can get the ducks to come with me, but what? Yeah.
I'll see if I can find some local.
Yeah, I mean that's that's a great example of active aero there. You guys ever look at pelicans and ducks and stuff in a wind tunnel to try and get some?
I know that one of the tunnels I test at has done a wingsuit, the flying squirrel suits.
Oh wow, okay.
With a tethered user. So they tethered the user and he was flying in the tunnel, controlling himself to work out different designs on the wingsuit. And let's see, I believe there have been some studies with geese flying in formation in tunnels,
Oh wow.
but I'm not sure if those were live geese or if they were models of geese. But there has been some study on wildlife.
So that's amazing. Being around birds, like you see how a feather is designed, and you see how many just tens of thousands of variables are in a feather.
Single feather, yeah.
Yeah, and then we're here forced to use all this solid stuff. When we come back, I want to ask you a question that leads into that. But if you want to know more about cars, about airplanes, about boats, about dirigibles, about motorcycles, about Jeeps, or did I mention boats? Trains, not ducks, Katie. And I'm not eating the hot sauce cake again. Autobooks, Aerobooks, folks, check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com. If you're in Burbank, California, you owe it to, if you're in Southern California, anywhere, you owe it to yourself to get by Autobooks. Check them out. They are a half-century institution in the Southern California automotive community. They have live events every week. They have author signings. They have cars and coffees and cruise-ins. If you can't make it out there, though, check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com, and you can order anything they have in the store right there online. So a duck has access to far more advanced aerodynamic properties than an F1 car does.
They do, but they also have to deal with a lot more ambient effects.
Right, and we had a great question about how ambient affects this stuff, and temperature especially, because air density is going to change drastically with temperature. So how do you start tuning and developing around that? Especially, you're a NASCAR guy now. NASCAR race is going to start, especially some of these night races, going to start in one temperature, end in a drastically different temperature. How do you work around that?
So the density is fairly linear with temperature, and the advantage, there's two things to take into account with motorsports for sure. As the air density increases, as it gets cooler in a night race, you wind up with more downforce. As the air density increases, you also wind up with more power, so you wind up going faster. But that increased downforce and that increased speed now drives the car a little closer to the ground.
Oh, wow.
So you wind up having to tune the car for higher cornering speeds and more travel. There are some significant effects to take into account. On a typical autocross event where you're not running at night, but you might be running in the morning and again in the afternoon, you'll have some differences, but they're going to be pretty minuscule.
So unless you're running a heavily winged car, you might not have to tune around them.
Right.
So how about taking some other examples from wildlife where we see a lot of flexible materials, soft materials? I know
most motorsports sanctioning bodies don't like movable aerodynamics, but they are a great thing to take advantage of in the amateur world because it works.
and certainly, the materials we're using all have an inherent amount of stiffness or flexibility to them. And I don't want to get you in trouble or anything, but there are certain things that happen allegedly during NASCAR races where the cars may change because of damage or something. So I would imagine if a car gets a fender bashed in or has physical body damage. That's going to change the aero quite a bit. But when you're maybe trying to make repairs to that car, how much are you considering aero in making repairs to that car? Could there be a place where maybe some damage happened to a car that wasn't necessarily a bad thing when it came to aero?
The current crop of regulations really don't allow you to make those sorts of damage repair fixes.
Okay.
The regulations are pretty tight in that respect. There were times when you could put big pieces of fiberglass on to fix a piece of a car that was damaged, that you would absolutely have your crash damage part be a better performance part than what you started the race with.
And you would make sure if somebody's going to get into a wreck, hey, left front, just say.
Those days are pretty well behind us. The regulations are pretty tight now.
Yeah, and you guys, I don't want to give away too much, but obviously it's fairly common knowledge that Toyota's going to have a new car for next year.
Yep.
And what's the timeline like on that? Because it's so heavily regulated, is a NASCAR timeline a little more compressed than, say, an IndyCar timeline or an IMSA timeline?
It's a little different because the NASCAR world controls the outside shape of the car, while the IndyCar teams start with effectively a generic tub, and they can bolt myriad pieces on to make whatever combination they want. So it's just a different set of rules and regulations to approach.
And then you have to argue with the design guys about why something is impossible to do.
Yes.
Or so. All right, let's. We got a couple of other good questions stacking up, but let's pop the wing on the back of this thing, and we'll talk a little bit about a little more advanced aero technology here. Shout out to Shields Windshields. We will put this over here. That was so easy to install. I did it while I was chugging hot sauce. Got it? Yeah, put one in the back. Here, let me put one in the back here for you.
Okay.
No, so what's an average day at work like for you these days, Steve? You're not traveling as much as you used to, but you're a lot of wind tunnel time.
But I spend a fair bit of time in the wind tunnel.
Not physically in the wind tunnel, but at the wind tunnel with the car in the wind tunnel.
Physically in the wind tunnel
really?
sometimes. Yeah, it's a typical wind tunnel day is probably 8 to 10 hours of watching the wind blow.
So how, from week to week, how much does a NASCAR aero package change?
The cars are always in development, so there's never really a static package. We're always working to improve them. If it's a count here or a count there, and we work in counts, which are fractions of CL or CD, what have you. So we're working on it really kind of 1% range changes of total, and if we have a good day, we stack up a few gains. If we don't have a good day, we find a few things that don't work.
And getting rid of something that doesn't work is probably just as valuable as finding something that does.
Reducing the number of variables by taking out the things that don't work is absolutely a benefit. And had an F1 aerodynamicist tell me that he was probably 90% fails and 10% gains. But at that point, those 10% gains all go right onto the car, and the 9 failures out of 10 lead you down different paths of other things to try.
Awesome. All right, let's deal with a couple questions here before we talk about a little more advanced rear aero. Okay, tunneled under tray versus a flat floor leading to a diffuser. What are we looking at for undercar aerodynamics? And I think that's a a sort of burgeoning area in amateur motorsports anyway is under Car Air Aerodynamics.
The difference between the two is really, it kind of comes down to what you consider an under tray and a diffuser. The Indy cars I worked on, the entire under tray was the diffuser and the tunnels that went either side of the cockpit, and the entire thing was one big package, but it was considered an under tray. The diffusers on cars are generally limited to cars that, by regulation or because of hardware under the car, exhaust and things of that sort generally, don't allow you to have a complete flat floor with tunnels. But I've had the opportunity to help build flat floors for production vehicles, and our primary goal was we were testing stiffness on convertibles, but the aero effect of the flat floor was evident when we took it to the test track, and we were pleasantly surprised that we didn't overheat things because we encased the entire exhaust with the drive shaft up inside a closed compartment underneath the car. But at the same time, we were able to generate a bit more rear downforce because the whole underbody was reacting a little bit more to the low pressure underneath.
Okay. We had a good question about dimpling, like you would see on a golf ball, basically, which I believe is there to sort of break up the boundary layer that creates
it helps to re-energize the boundary layer.
Okay.
So that the air can stay attached a little bit longer and reduce the drag signature, the area that the air separates in.
So is there anywhere we could incorporate some of that technology into something like this?
Motorsports, not so much. You could potentially do some surface treatments on areas that have high curvature, but you're probably better off dealing with those areas by
just taking the air away from them, basically.
Well, or adding turning vanes and things of that sort.
Okay. Okay, got a question from YouTube. This is back at the front, but something we kind of touched on before. If you've got a front bumper with a large overhang, which we sort of do you build an air dam down to the splitter from the front of the bumper or from further back to gain upper area on the splitter? So do you blunt the front off, or do you?
If the air intake is below the bumper, then you probably want to keep the air dam a little further back so that you maintain high energy flow to your radiator, to your cooling system. If the cooling system is right out front already, then go ahead and build your air dam right out front. The suction underneath the splitter and air dam is much more effective than, it's more amplified than the high pressure above just because of the proximity to the ground.
And that actually that leads into this question is how do we locate places where we actually want to bring air in, like brake ducts and cooling intakes? How do we make sure we're not directing air around those?
The highest pressure area on the car is going to be right at the base of the windshield or right at the center of the nose. And you can really kind of eyeball where the stagnation pressure is, or you can put a little bit of oil. Used oil is great because it's got a little dark color to it so you can see it. A couple drops in a kind of a grid pattern around the front. Drive the car, whichever dot doesn't move, that's where the highest pressure is at, and locate your inlets as close to that as possible.
So, okay, we got to start wrapping things up pretty soon. We got a nice crowd here, so I want to make sure we get to all this stuff. So thanks for sticking around, everybody. By the way, I hope if you're enjoying it tonight, I know we got a big crowd here tonight, so I know that means we've got a lot of new folks. Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. And if you like what you're seeing, like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, throw us a share. Check us out at grassrootsmotorsports.com for all of this stuff and more. In a little bit, we're going to be telling you about how to get some free Grassroots Motorsports stickers for your car, for your toolbox, for whatever. Stick around for a little bit longer. Let's talk about wings now. So we've talked about creating downforce at the rear using a spoiler by stacking up some high pressure air on top of the trunk, pushing the back down. We're essentially trying to do the same thing with a wing, but we're using a little bit more complex aerodynamics to essentially create the same or a similar effect, but with less drag, right?
Right. Wings typically are lower drag because they have a lower profile, so they're not seeing as much high pressure air impacting all the vertical faces, if you will. At the same time, you're trying to take the curvature of this piece to deflect the air up. The spoiler does the same thing. It generally deflects the air upward, which the reactionary force is to push the car down. So you're doing the same basic thing with a wing of a car. You're doing it with a little more finesse. You're not using quite as big a hammer to make the air turn. And again, making the air turn is working the air, which makes drag. But in this case, you're trying to generate, take that turning air and use it to generate more downforce. And part of that is purely because if you look at a wing in profile, it's got a much bigger cross section looking down at it from the top than a spoiler does. It does have a similar leverage effect to a spoiler, but in this case, this one's overhanging the body, so you get a little bit more leverage. But the spoiler generates its effective downforce through a lot of drag effectively.
So that's you brought the leverage thing up, and that's important to remember, is that wherever this is creating downforce, there's going to be a virtual lever arm between this and the center of mass of the car.
Yes.
So the further you can get a downforce producing device from the center of mass of the car, its effects will be amplified by the length of that lever arm.
They'll be amplified on that end of the car. They'll be reverse amplified on the far end of the car.
Right.
So this wing making downforce will try and lift the front of the car. The splitter on the front of this car will try and lift the rear of the car. So they are kind of fighting it out. And that comes down to balance, which is generally, you kind of get that balance close to what the car's natural balance is, but it can be adjusted for drivers. So a little more balance at the front for a driver that likes a little freer car, and more toward the back if the driver needs a little more understeer, tighter car.
Okay. All right, so great segue. We got two perfect questions came in at just the right time. First was regarding swan neck. So we'll talk about some of the individual components of this RHR wing. This was designed with a cantilever mount, an overhead mount, a swan neck, as they're commonly called. And just for the record, I explained this correctly on the show a few weeks ago. Yeah. Steve was actually watching. I got it right, but give me the real explanation. You know, not me going, I think it's this. Why is a top mount wing better than a bottom mount wing?
So the general scenario is that you've got high pressure on the top surface and low pressure underneath. If you have a mount like this underneath the wing, the air is going to have to work around the pylon mount, which generally is going to cause it some reaction. It's going to mess up the flow a little bit, and you're potentially going to stall the wing locally behind that pylon. And on the bottom side, because that's your suction side, that's the working side, it reduces your downforce. If you have a little bit of stall locally around the pylon on the top side, it's less of an effect because you've already got high pressure on the top side.
So we're going to lose some efficiency. We're putting that in the place where it's our most efficient loss of efficiency.
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's the least detriment for the effect.
So that brings us to the end plates. And what are we trying to accomplish with these, besides, again, being a great place for stickers?
A great place for ads
or
car numbers or whatever. End plates, if you think about airplanes, their wings are generally really long and slender, and there is some outward flow. So the flow moves out along the high pressure side and tries to move in across the low pressure side. So there's this weird twisting effect that's happening. And the end plate is effectively trying to stop that, because when that happens at the end of the wing, the high pressure air can spin around the bottom side and again reduce the downforce, the suction on the bottom side. Which
is probably the reason that the end plate is bigger on the bottom, because we have a lot more volume of a higher velocity of air, more energy passing under it.
Yep.
So we're trying to keep the bottom of this wing as efficient as possible.
Yes.
Whereas if we lose some efficiency up here,
it's less of an effect. Yeah.
And if it produces turbulence, that's leverage as well.
Right.
You know, it's not the kind we're looking for, but it's better than nothing. It's better than lift. So okay, actually, Jeremy, great question to wrap things up. Are there any rules of thumb to this? I mean, so many of the classes we run in are limited by the rules as to what we can run. So our 10-inch rear spoiler that we can run in cam, is there a similarly sized splitter that we should look at to make that, work efficiently? Or should we just start at whatever the rules allow and dial back from there, basically?
Honestly, I would start at the maximum allowed for the rules and dial back to what makes the car drivable and comfortable. We had a discussion about comfort versus absolute performance earlier, and for the amateur level, for sure, comfort is going to be a very big piece of it. If you're not comfortable driving the car as deep as the car will allow you, you're not going to drive it all the way to its limits.
Yeah, and as Steve said, in the F1 world, if the driver's not comfortable with the car, what's the solution?
Get a different driver.
Yeah.
Get one that'll deal with it.
So, yeah, it just comes down to what you're willing to put up with. All right, guys, great show tonight. I hope we answered at least most of your questions. We'll throw up a link to a couple of good Aero stories that have been in Grassroots Motorsports Magazine. If you want to subscribe to Grassroots Motorsports Magazine, I'm not going to stop you. You can go to grassrootsmotorsports.com. What's our deal of the month right now? Does anybody know?
Ultimate bundle.
Ultimate bundle, which you get a year of Grassroots Motorsports. You get a hat, a shirt, a couple of 4 different stickers, and that's what? How much is that? It's like, David, how much is the ultimate bundle?
What?
How much is the ultimate bundle we have going on right now? Go to grassrootsmotorsports.com. It's right on the front page. It's our deal of the month. It's a great deal. If you want some free stickers, I will send you some free stickers. All you have to do is go to Grassroots. Well, hang on. Before I do that, let me tell you what's going to happen. If we're going to send you free stickers, we want them to go someplace cool. So put them on your car, put them on your toolbox, put them someplace the public is going to see them. And when they ask, hey, what is that? You say, idiot, it's the coolest magazine / live show / great way to go to the Midi or the Rolex 24 at Daytona or any other thing. That's what Grassroots Motorsports is all about. We do awesome stuff every week right here in the shop. We do awesome stuff 8 times a year in the magazine. So check it out at grassrootsmotorsports.com. If you want a couple of free stickers, grassrootsmotorsports.com/free stickers. Just that easy. We're going to ask your name and address, where to send them to, and we're going to go ahead and get those sent off to you. And every week, we throw a little bit of extra swag in one of those packages, something from CRC, something from one of our sponsors, and that is just our way of letting you know that we love you. Speaking of CRC, thanks very much to them for being the presenting sponsor of this show. You can check them out at crcindustries.com. Even better, check them out at any retailer near you, Lowe's, Home Depot, Advanced Auto Parts, O'Reilly Auto Parts, Napa, any place you buy hardware, tools, chemicals, they're going to have CRC stuff. And you're going to get a great product when you're reaching up to that shelf for that CRC can of brake clean. You're also going to get a product from a company that supports this world we live in. Also, check out our friends at Coney, coney-na.com. Great shocks, great people, great technology at Coney. You can also check them out at the Advance the Nation Tour. No, the Activate the Nation Tour. I keep wanting to say Advance. The Activate the Nation Tour. Coming to a city near you. Get to drive Coney-equipped vehicles in an autocross situation. Ask questions of Coney engineers. We'll be at the DeLand event next Monday, so check them out at coney-na.com or check out a link to the events that you can get to in the next couple weeks anywhere in the country. Also, Autobooks, Aerobooks. Check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com. Tens of thousands of books, magazines, DVDs, and collectibles right there in Burbank, California. If you can't make it out there in person, check them out on the web, autobooks-aerobooks.com. I know you love to read. Please keep the printed word alive by going to autobooks-aerobooks.com. Thanks very much to my friend Steve Stafford. Thanks for coming. Thanks to the folks at RHR Performance for this amazing technology we have bolted on this car. Thanks to everybody who sent us great questions tonight. I hope we got to all of them. If we missed you, I'm sorry. We'll try and get you on the flip-flop and we'll make up for it. Thanks to David, who's back running social media, Katie, our director, Chris, our cameraman, Steve. I'm JG. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We'll see you again. A couple quick show notes. We're going to be live Monday from the Coney Activate the Nation Tour. Don't know what time, probably around noon. Watch our Facebook page for that. Wednesday, the show is going to be at a special time. It's going to be earlier in the day, probably around 4 p.m. Eastern. Going to be coming at you from a Corvette shop a little bit south of here called the Vet Doctor. Show you all about what you're going to be doing when you're changing a clutch on a Corvette. We're going to have the entire drivetrain out of the car. We're going to be going over a lot of the other things you're going to want to look at when you have that drivetrain out and how to deal with some of the stuff under this Corvette. So we'll see you again. We'll have notes up on Facebook as for actual time on that. That's it, folks. We'll see you again next week. We'll see you on Monday from the Coney Tour. We'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you very much for watching. Good night, everybody.